Olá, pessoal. É um prazer estarmos aqui com o nosso convidado Amit. Em breve ele vai se apresentar. Eu me chamo Daniel e represento a Numera. Lembro que essa conversa faz parte de uma série de entrevistas que a Numera faz com líderes de RH, líderes de People Analytics e líderes de negócio sobre qual é o papel de gestão de pessoas numa companhia. Hoje o Amit está falando dos Estados Unidos e eu já vou pedir para ele se apresentar. A entrevista vai ser conduzida em inglês, ok? So, dear Amit, could you present yourself to our public, say where you work and what is your role there?
Absolutely, Daniel. Thank you so much for having me on this show. I love that introduction. I don't know what you said, but it sounded so beautiful.
Nice.
So Daniel, right now I lead a company called People Analytics Success. So I founded this a few years ago.
Yeah.
I'm based in Boston, as you may have said. And it's essentially a consulting company where I provide advice and exec coaching and education to help both organizations as well as individuals achieve success in the area of people analytics.
Cool. Perfect. And Amit, you have a economics and engineering background. How have you entered into this human resources business, human resources environment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I sort of ended up in HR by chance, right? So as a Indian of a certain generation, the only opportunity for us was through engineering. So I did engineering.
Okay.
But I also had a passion for economics, and in particular labor economics, through teachers I had in high school and college.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of the background. It's been useful to me because from an engineering standpoint, you're sort of wondering how things work and trying to fix things or at least have a solutions orientation. And the economics background helps because it's really, if you think about people analytics, a lot of it is about optimization. So how do you optimize processes or programs? And so that's been helpful as well, the combination.
Perfect. And I have seen your career and you have worked as a senior executive in top-notch companies such as IBM, Goldman Sachs, Apple, Wayfair. So everyone in the world knows these companies. They are quite awesome. What have you done to be so successful in the corporate world?
Well, yeah, thank you. I feel very fortunate to have worked for some of these amazing companies. My own career has sort of zigzagged between research, consulting, and being in the corporate world. I began actually as an economist at the World Bank doing research into labor markets in developing countries, and then fell into consulting through a company called Towers Perrin. And so that's where I sort of fell into more formal, the HR area. But then my next job was at Lehman Brothers, where I was in compensation and very much in the area of HR. Yeah. So, I think what's helped me is, I think because of the economics background, the business background, I've always been curious and have focused on how organizations make money. And so from a people analytics standpoint, that's been helpful because I focus more on the business issues, the business problems, and then try and figure out what's the right approach from a people standpoint. Whereas, if you start from, an HR issue or a non-business issue, sometimes it doesn't have as much impact for the business. So I think that's been helpful. I think also what's been useful for me is coming from outside HR, so almost like an outsider who never had any training in human resources. Not that it's a bad thing, but it allowed me to sort of come to the picture without having any preconceptions about how things should be done. And so I would always reduce things to first principles. What's the issue here? What are we trying to solve for? What's the business need, and then try and come up with a solution or an answer to a question using science, mathematics. And so having that perspective of not coming from within the system has been very helpful. And I think finally, if I may, each one of these companies has a very different culture.
Yeah.
And they're all cultures of excellence, obviously. They bring out the best in you. But I grew up in India, and then I came to the US to finish the last years of high school. And I went to an international school in the mountains of New Mexico. So we had 200 students from 65 different countries. And so right from the get-go, my outlook has been global, but I'm able to to learn about culture and be familiar and comfortable with different cultures. And in fact, my first year roommate was from Brazil, from Sao Paulo.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I think being culturally adaptive has also been helpful, where I can very quickly understand the culture and navigate within the culture.
Okay, perfect. And now tell us a little bit about your involvement with people analytics. When this subject came up in your life, how was it?
Yeah, so people analytics actually, in our little chat before this segment, has been around for some time now. It's obviously recent in some areas, more established in others. But I would say I personally have been doing people analytics for at least 20 years. And I mentioned my first job outside research and consulting was at Lehman Brothers. And I joined in compensation, very traditional function. But because I was new to HR, I would ask questions and I would wonder why things are done a certain way. And so I began noticing certain issues. For example, the investment banking division would sometimes hire too many people. They'd have to let them go. It was very expensive and not good for the brand. And so I came up with a model that helped them predict how many analysts and associates they should hire every year based on a whole bunch of different factors using a mathematical model. Then I did a bunch of other research, essentially. So this was back in 1999, trying to figure out what is it that leads to success in the company.
Yeah.
And how do we retain people? How do we engage people? So addressing problems like that. And I essentially built predictive models. And this came to the notice of management. And I finally, got the courage to ask my manager, hey, this looks like it's getting a lot of traction in the company. There seems to be a demand for this sort of work. Yeah. Why don't you let me set up a new organization? And he did. We called it HR strategy and analysis, because the word analytics hadn't actually come into common usage. So it was analysis. Yeah. And I think everything begins from strategy. So I wanted HR strategy and analysis. So it was just me. And then over time, I was able to hire an analyst.
Yeah.
And so this was, like I said, back in 1999. And that was could be the very first people analytics team.
Yeah.
But then I sort of fell back into compensation and then talent management and other areas. And then many, many years later, this was back in 2011, I was approached by a company called McKesson, Fortune 10 company, healthcare company, and they wanted to start a people analytics team. They called it workforce intelligence. So people analytics and workforce planning. And so I was hired as their brand new leader to essentially start the team and do people analytics for the first time. So I did that for about three and a half years. And then I got a call from Apple, who was curious about what is people analytics and what do teams do. And I was so happy that Apple wanted my opinion. And then after some time, they asked me to come and join them and start a people analytics team at Apple. So that was a fantastic opportunity. And so that's sort of my more formally leading a team at McKesson and then at Apple, and then more recently at Wayfair, which is a Boston-based company in the retail e-commerce sector.
Okay, very cool. And now I have a question regarding the definition of people analytics. Here in Brazil, so Numera is a B2B business, so our clients are companies. And when we talk to HR professionals here, some of them think that people analytics is a methodology. Some of them think that is a system. Some of them think that is a framework. What is people analytics in your vision and in your experience?
Yeah, it's all of those things, right?
Yeah.
And I think early on in the field, we used to grapple for what's a good definition of people analytics. And there are many, many good definitions, but it's really about, finding patterns in human resource information, connecting it to business outcomes, providing decision makers with data-driven insights that helps them make better decisions. Yeah. The way I think about it really these days is we've seen that the value of a firm is comprised of both tangible value and intangible value. And more, the proportion of a firm's value that's intangible has been increasing. And I think that intangible value, some of it is intellectual property, some of it is contracts, some of it is software. But in my mind, a lot of this value that's hard to quantify is really hidden value that's wrapped up in individual capabilities, in teams and their ability to connect and perform, and organizations and leadership. And so I think of people analytics as the way to almost discover this hidden value, to quantify it and make it real, and then find ways so that organizations can both maintain the value, make sure that it doesn't erode, but also increase the value of the organization through better performance, better business outcomes. So that's sort of my very high level take on what people analytics is. And at the end of the day, it's a collection of tools, methodologies, frameworks. You need to have a certain way of thinking about things. And it's very much rooted in quantification. But I've also come around to the fact that we've probably over-rotated on quantification. I think we have to come back a little bit to some of, maybe the older ways of figuring things out, right? So having conversations, focus groups, trying to understand the lived experience that people have in an organization, as opposed to trying to extract it through a survey and quantifying things.
Very nice. And Amit, I have a question, and this is very important for me. As you mentioned before, in HR in general, in classical HR training, you don't have, let's say, analytics training. And in general, the background of HR professionals is not related to analytics or mathematics or this kind of thing. Right. So how do you convince an HR executive who has almost no background in analytics and, let's say, quantitative skills to use analytics in human capital management? How do you convince this person?
Yeah, it's a very good question. We have to convince people like that all the time. Yeah. But the good news is, at least here in the US, and I'm sure in other places as well, analytics has actually entered the curriculum of HR programs. Mm-hmm. And there are some institutions that have been teaching people analytics for many, many years. So for example, Cornell University and their Industrial and Labor Relations School, where I've had the good fortune to do some guest lectures, has been doing it for a long time. They have a great program. Mm-hmm. And there's more and more attention to statistics and analytics in HR programs by and large. But you're right, many people didn't join HR to run Excel spreadsheets or to build models, right? Yeah. And there certainly is a generation of HR leaders, or maybe a few generations, that didn't expect analytics, didn't expect to be doing analytics or leading in an environment where analytics is very important. Yeah. And that's actually part of my business, to coach HR leaders in that area. But I think to answer your question more directly, I think you have to demonstrate what's in it for them and how their leadership impact improves through the adoption of people analytics, and how the impact of the human resources function that they lead also begins to change. And it's interesting, I teach a course in people analytics at Stanford Continuing Studies. There's some students from Brazil in it. And I teach a case from Harvard Business School. And, it's actually a case about a consulting company that's begun consulting in people analytics and what the market is and how they approach it. Very interesting. But they said, and it's a prominent company, they said that most of their business for people analytics comes not from HR, but from business leaders. And I think that's probably going to be more and more the norm. And if you're a people analytics leader in a company where you're trying to help people understand what is people analytics and what you can do, a shortcut is actually going to business leaders and getting the business leader to be interested. In which case, then the HR leader becomes interested as well. So it's not the ideal route. Hopefully, the HR leadership and organization would already be invested and be doing this. But I've often found that a good catalyst for interest from HR leaders is interest from the business.
Okay, perfect. And now I want to know about the people analytics market in the US. So how big is people analytics adoption in US companies?
I would say from my perspective, if you go back 20 years, it's grown incredibly, right? So it's become more and more mainstream in the US. There are some statistics out there. I recall something from LinkedIn, who sort of has the data that, the majority of Fortune 1000 companies has their own people analytics team. And certainly from that case study, which I teach, that company itself has inquiries, hundreds of inquiries on people analytics from its clients almost every year. So it's become quite big. It's become more mainstream. There are many, many conferences, obviously, on people analytics. There are people analytics communities. Most cities, large cities in the US, have a people analytics meetup group where professionals, people analytics practitioners, HR leaders, others interested in the area, meet every month or so and have discussions, have speakers. And as I said, there's plenty of coursework now too, both in institutions of higher learning, but also commercially available people analytics courses. And if you looked at LinkedIn, you'll notice many, many people analytics leadership jobs being advertised. And then I see a lot of these because a lot of companies or search firms come to me to see if I know people. But the activity is much larger. And I would say there's probably a shortage at this point, speaking to the demand of qualified people analytics leaders. And that's why companies sometimes have a hard time starting out, because you need somebody, everyone wants somebody who's had experience, but there aren't a lot of people who've had the experience leading a people analytics team. So that if anything, is one of the hindrances to the growth of people analytics.
Okay. And now going to our last question, Amit. In the last years, 1 year ago, you opened your own company, you became an entrepreneur. And what has been your motivation to open a company fully dedicated to people analytics and not, let's say, HR or business management, business strategy? Well, why have you opened a company dedicated to this subject?
Yeah, I think it speaks to your last question, right? In terms of the growth of the people analytics area, in terms of demand. So this is actually my second stint as an independent consultant. The first time around was right after the financial crisis of 2008. And I did that for a few years, and I focused more on HR strategy and on incentive design, because a lot of my background at that point had been in compensation and benefits. And after having started people analytics at Lehman Brothers, that's in financial services, in McKesson, that's in healthcare, in Apple, that's in technology, at Wayfair, retail e-commerce. So all these different experiences, and my own experience previously as a consultant at Towers Perrin and at IBM as well. I felt that I had a very unique sort of set of experiences and expertise and perspectives to offer organizations that were trying to improve their business outcomes through people. And I also realized that, a lot of HR leaders and people analytics leaders needed guidance. And I felt, I had to struggle for many years to be able to explain what people analytics is, what the benefits were, what to do, how to do it. And, my first engagements were often, the first few jobs was, I had to explain why I was there and what my team did, right? That's no longer the case. But I can help companies and individuals sort of accelerate that journey so they can begin to get the value of people analytics very quickly. And I've also realized over my own journey in people analytics that, it's less the mathematics, because you can always make the equations work out. You can always design the model and make it work and make it be useful. You often have to deal with technology for pulling data together from different sources, but also to build platforms. And that's a large part of the job, but eventually you can pull all of that together. What I found the hardest part has been driving and managing change, because people analytics has changed the complexion, the nature, and I would argue the future of human resources.
Yeah.
And so trying to help organizations and leaders and practitioners to understand that, to get with the program and embrace it, even though they don't have necessarily the comfort with statistics or technology. I think that's what's been the biggest learning. And as a result, for the last few years, I've been working on a doctorate on the side, nights and weekends. And it's a doctorate in organizational change and leadership.
Okay.
Because I think that's really the tougher nut to crack, how to get organizations and HR to adopt and leverage and benefit from people analytics. So that's sort of the journey for the consulting company that I have. And then coaching is a part of it, as well as education. And I mentioned I'm teaching a people analytics course at Stanford.
Okay, perfect, Amit. So I thank you for your precious time. I know that you have a busy agenda, and having a person here with a very, very nice career and expertise in the people analytics subject is a pleasure for us. It's an honor. So thank you so much for being here with Numera.
Daniel, the pleasure is mine. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I hope this has been helpful for people. They're welcome to reach out to me via LinkedIn. Yeah. And my guidance to everyone, the last word I'll say is, I truly believe people analytics is the future of human resources. Yeah. And I predict that the future leaders of HR, the future CHROs, will, if they don't come from people analytics, they would have had experience or some exposure to it. So I welcome anyone who wants to join. You don't need to have an engineering background. You don't need to have an economics background. You can join from any background. It's really a wide open space, and I welcome anyone to it, and I wish you and your organization the best of luck as well.
Okay. Thank you so much, Amit. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.